Kincolith rests quietly along the Nass River in northern British Columbia, where the spirit of the land flows to the trees and the mountains. A place where strength of community and tradition are as constant as the river's currents, carrying the stories of ancestors and whispers of the forest. In the village of Kincolith, also known as Gingul, an ancient sadness lingers by the creek. It's a tale whispered for generations, spoken in hushed tones by relatives and passed down through the bloodlines like an inherited curse. The legend tells of a young mother who once lived in the heart of the village. She was a woman devoted to her child, her days filled with laughter and light as she raised her only son near the banks of the creek. A powerful river that twisted through the land like a dark, untamable vein. But one cold autumn evening, tragedy struck. Her son had wandered too close to the water's edge, and before anyone could reach him, the swift, hungry water swept him away. For days the villagers searched, combing the riverbanks, but they found nothing. Her grief was a wound that could not heal, a shadow that stretched across her life, twisting her into something unrecognizable. She was seen by the river at all hours, whispering his name, her face hollow and gaunt as she wandered through the mists, calling for her child. The story goes that her despair bound her to that very spot, her sorrow deepening with each year until her form became twisted and monstrous. Her clothes faded to the color of moss and waterlogged leaves. Her once soft voice grew into a rasping wail that echoed through the woods. Now, they say, she wanders the village and its outskirts at night, desperate and disfigured, a mother in search of her child, which will never return. From a young age, every child in the village hears the same warnings. Elders, with wise hands and solemn faces, speak of the Green Lady like a force of nature, inevitable, powerful, and dangerous. They remind the children not to wander at night, to avoid the woods alone after dusk, and to never answer the cries they might hear in the wind. If you see a woman in green, the elders say, their voices low and urgent, turn away, do not speak to her, do not look at her in the eyes, and if you hear a mother's voice calling for her child, leave. She doesn't want her own child anymore. She'll take any she can find. The warning settles like a chill in the bones of the young, and most listen, clinging to their elders' words like a lifeline. But there's always those who are curious, those who believe they can sneak by unseen, or who think the legend is just a tale to keep those from wandering too far. It is on nights like these that the Green Lady is said to be most dangerous. One late autumn evening, as a heavy fog crept over Kincolith, a young boy named Tavin found himself lingering near the edge of the woods. His friends had dared him to sneak down to the creek after dark, to prove he wasn't afraid of the old stories. As he made his way closer, every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves, the murmur of the creek, and the whisper of the trees in the cold breeze. Then, as he made his way closer to the rushing water, he heard a faint voice in the distance. A faint, mournful cry. It was a voice, unmistakably feminine, and it seemed to be calling a name, over and over again. His pulse quickened, but he told himself it was just the wind, until he heard it more clearly. The voice was closer now, ragged and filled with sorrow. Tavin froze. He had heard the warnings and he couldn't stop himself from looking around, searching for the source of the voice. And that's when he saw her. Just at the edge of the trees, a figure dressed in a tattered green gown that hung from her frame like a water-soaked moss. Her face was obscured, hidden beneath tangled wet hair, but he could see her arms reaching out, beckoning him forward with an unnatural urgency. The weight of the stories crashed down on him in that instant, and he remembered his grandmother's voice. Do not look at her in the eyes, child. Turn away, don't look back. But his legs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the figure's unnatural presence. She began to move towards him, her cries rising into a frantic, desperate wail. Suddenly, a voice shouted from behind him. It was his uncle, who had come searching when Tavin hadn't returned with his friends. The temporary paralysis seemed to be broken, and Tavin stumbled backward, his uncle grabbing his arm and pulling him away. As they ran, he dared one last look over his shoulder, only to see the figure melt into the shadows, disappearing into the mist, her cries fading but lingering, a hollow sound echoing through the trees. When they reached the safety of the village lights, Tavin's uncle pulled him close, his face stern and pale. "You're lucky," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Not everyone who sees her makes it back." That night Tavin laid awake, his mind restless and his heart pounding, unable to shake the cold that had seeped into his bones. He found himself staring outside his window at a raven perched in a tree, overlooking the creek he had been at only moments ago. The bird's eyes seemed to glint in the moonlight, watching him with an unsettling stillness, as if it too carried the memory of what he had seen. The image of the Green Lady was seared into his mind, her outstretched hands, her desperate cries, and the hollow sadness that filled the air around her. And though he would grow older, though he would eventually leave Kincolith, the memory of her would haunt him, a reminder of the dark, twisting woods, and the mother who would forever search for the child the river had stolen. The legend of the Sasquatch is one I've heard countless times coming from the Nass Valley. Among the forests and mountains surrounding my hometown, there has been many supposed sightings over the years. Some of these sightings come from those I know well, trusted people within the community, while others are whispers passed down with a blend of awe and caution. As I understand it, there are different ways of interpreting a Sasquatch. Some believe it's a supernatural being, possessing powers beyond our understanding, while others think it's a real reclusive creature, living hidden in the vast wilderness around us. The wilderness around my home is so dense and remote that it's easy to see why many people believe in a Sasquatch's existence. One thing that's often mentioned is the creature's overpowering odor, a foul smell like rotting, sour, or fecal scents. Something unique and instantly alarming. People who claim to have encountered a Sasquatch often recall feeling an eerie sense of being watched, along with the unmistakable stench. Descriptions of the Sasquatch usually share the same features: a tall humanoid figure with long limbs, particularly elongated arms, and a thick coat of dark fur. Sightings are always fleeting. Glimpses in the periphery, a shape slipping between the trees, never entirely clear. There's also a commonly shared belief that the shock of seeing a Sasquatch makes it hard to respond. Witnesses describe a sort of paralysis, a frozen awe, like they're trapped in the creature's presence and simply cannot look away. This awe and fear blend into the supernatural beliefs surrounding this creature. Some say that photographing or recording the Sasquatch can be terrible luck, a curse that might impact the witness or even their family. Others say that the creature has paranormal abilities, including the power to vanish at will, slipping away into the forest as if though it had never been there. Despite the fleeting nature of these encounters, there's always been recurring evidence over the years. Footprints appear where none should be. Hunters report hearing strange guttural calls echoing through the trees, and people share sightings of a creature that defies classification. And it's not just our community that has stories like this. First Nations groups across BC have their own accounts of a Sasquatch, adding to the legend's mystique. One story often told with hushed voices happened to a group of workers during a lunch break. They were sitting on a grassy mound at the edge of a dense forest clearing, eating and chatting when something strange caught their attention. As they turned to look, their laughter died in their throats. There, about 100 feet away, stood a towering figure. A shape that seemed almost human, but unmistakably different. Covered in a thick matted fur that blended into the shadows of the trees, the figure moved slowly and deliberately. Its height alone was staggering, towering over any human. Yet it moved with surprising quietness, as though the forest itself was concealing its presence. Long arms hung at its sides, reaching down to almost its knees, and as it walked it seemed aware of the onlookers, though it didn't turn to look at them. The men sat frozen, their food forgotten, their hands motionless. They felt an unnatural stillness creep over them, as if something much older and larger than themselves had drawn a boundary they dared not to cross. None of them could summon the courage to move, much less reach for a camera. The figure passed through the clearing and melted back into the shadows, vanishing as if though it had never been there. Only when their temporary shock had lifted did they realize they had been holding their breath. Another tale, far more gruesome, came from a hunter who had ventured deep into the woods alone. The silence was broken only by sounds of his own footsteps and rustling leaves when he came upon a clearing. There, in the center, lay the remains of a large grizzly bear, but something was deeply wrong. The bear, enormous and fierce, even in death, was ripped apart. Limbs scattered like broken branches, and the ground soaked with dark, clotted blood. The sight was so shocking he felt his pulse quicken as he scanned the area. The hunter, a seasoned outdoorsman, knew bears well. He had hunted them, tracked them, and respected them. But he also knew there was no other animal in these woods that can tear apart a fully grown grizzly bear in such a violent, almost calculated way. He felt an instinctive sense of dread. This was no ordinary predator's handiwork. Some say Sasquatch, with its incredible strength, possesses a primal ferocity that makes it the true apex predator of the forest, capable of confronting any challenge that dares to encroach on its territory. In this case, it seemed to send a clear message. These woods are mine. To this day, people in the valley carry these stories, describing a creature they know to exist just beyond the edges of civilization. Some say Sasquatch stays hidden, avoiding human contact by choice, wise to the danger we pose. It lurks in the vast wilderness, slipping through the shadows, always watching and knowing that people may catch a glimpse now and then, but only if it allows them to. In recent years, local media picked up on encounters that left seasoned officials and residents alike questioning what lies in the dense forests of the Nass Valley. One account which made waves in the community and beyond came from a corporal, Nathan Dame of the Lissom's Nass Valley RCMP detachment. His experience captured local news coverage, and has become one of the most talked about Sasquatch sightings in recent memory, drawing attention to the age-old mystery of an elusive creature whose presence have been whispered about for generations. Believe it or not, I did see one. I was skeptical before, but I'm not anymore, Dame said, recounting his experience from the late October, on duty and traveling from Nisga'a to Greenville. Dame was driving along the long straight stretch of the road when something caught his eye. A figure so large it leapt across the entire highway in one bound, vanishing into the trees. That's what caught my attention, seeing it leap across the entire highway. It took a few seconds to process what I saw, he said. With long, dark chocolate brown hair, towering an estimated 10 feet tall, and possessing limbs stretched far beyond any known animal, Dame's description left little to the imagination. It was not a moose or a bear standing up. I have nothing else to explain what I saw other than a Sasquatch, he said. His encounter continued just weeks later, in early November, when he noticed another large brown figure ducked behind a tree while he was stopped on the highway. Despite getting closer to investigate, it vanished among the sparse trees, leaving him baffled once more. Conversations with local Greenville residents revealed they had too encountered something large, elusive, and mysterious, fueling belief that a Sasquatch roams this land. The fascination with these sightings is far from new. In 2008, local Sasquatch hunter Larry Summerfield unveiled a 16-inch long cast of a footprint, found in a gravel pit east of Terrace, estimated to belong to a 1,000-pound creature towering at least 10 feet high. The Nisga'a Valley itself, rich in Sasquatch lore, was the site of some of the earliest notable footprints discoveries in 1976. Here, a group of children stumbled upon tracks over 15 inches long, with a 7-foot stride, leaving plaster cast evidence of an unknown creature whose steps were carefully documented by Sasquatch researcher Bob Titmus. Encounters date back decades, like one in 2000 when a resident of Nisga'a spotted a figure moving towards his house. Initially appearing as an average-sized man, the creature moved like a gait of a person. But as it drew closer, its shaggy hair-covered arms revealed a distinctly non-human presence. Its arm went down to the branch and pulled the branch down, he recalled, the hair unmistakably visible from the distance. The Sasquatch holds a place in traditions of many First Nations in the area, each with a unique name. The Haida call it the Gochwit, the Kwakiutl call it the Buchwas, and among the Tsimshian, it is known as the Bowis. These stories of the Sasquatch, whether tales of supernatural powers or sightings in dense forests, continue to blur the lines between myth and reality, embedding themselves in landscape and culture. With the vast unexplored wilderness as its backdrop, the Nass Valley remains a fitting, almost sacred territory for this creature as elusive as the Sasquatch. A reminder of the mysteries that nature might still hold just beyond the reach of human civilization. As we wrap up today's story, it is important to acknowledge that Sasquatch remains one of the most controversial legends to this day. For some, the evidence is overwhelming, while others remain skeptical, pointing to hoaxes or mixed identifications. The truth, however, may never be fully known. And that's what makes the Sasquatch a compelling mystery. Whether you believe in the creature or not, the stories and encounters continue to capture our imaginations, and that's the true power of legend. So, what do you believe? The answer is up to you.